Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is St. Louis on the Air.
What we're going to have to do as a city, we're going to have to walk and chew gum. We're going to have to deal with issues on the ground when it comes to crime and negative behaviors. At the same time, we've got to deal with root causes.
The momentum that we had, when people were sort of moving into the city, has slowed down simply because I just see less people around who are interested in doing that.
We have to remember that we're in a very unique position in this city, unlike our peer cities, where we're competing against our suburban neighbor who's just 10 minutes away.
I'm Sarah Fetsky. In many ways, downtown St. Louis may have been hit harder by the pandemic than just about any neighborhood across the region. Office workers left as white-collar jobs went remote. Residents say that created a vacuum, one that troublemakers were only too willing to exploit. Last week, St. Louis Mayor Tishaura Jones unveiled her plan to get a handle on downtown. It entails more police on weekends in the short term and a focus group to look at bigger issues in the long term. But is that the right approach? And even if it is it enough? Well, we'll open the phone lines to hear your thoughts in just a bit. But first, joining us now are two public officials who know downtown better than just about anybody. Since 2015, Alderman Jack Coatar has represented a ward that includes downtown. Alderman Coatar, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
And we're also joined today by Alderman James Page. He was elected this spring to represent a ward that also includes downtown, and he is the executive director of the Downtown St. Louis Neighborhood Association. Alderman Page, welcome.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Glad to be here.
So I want to start with you, Alderman Page. You've lived downtown for about 19 years now. Give us some perspective. How is downtown doing?
Well, let's just say 19 years to be exact this month, coincidentally. Wow. But who's counting?
It's a great anniversary.
Yes. I proudly live in downtown St. Louis and have all that time. And I have witnessed the birth, if you will, of the downtown loft district. I live in one of said lofts. Love it. No gardening, no grass to cut. I can focus on issues. So I really love it. I will say that downtown has changed or migrated or morphed somewhat over that 19, almost 20-year period. But I am very, very optimistic that the city of St. Louis is resilient, and I'm optimistic that we will power through our current issues.
I love that optimism. Does it feel like we're in a hard spot right now, something that we do need to power through, or is that just doom and gloom from people who don't even live there?
Well, I don't know if I'd couch it as a hard spot, but we are facing a number of challenges. Some of which are local in nature, some of which are brought by state legislation in Jefferson City, such as the ultra-liberal gun laws in the state of Missouri that has left us with some challenges around gun violence.
Ultra-conservative gun laws.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Liberal as in right to carry and the like. Conservative in philosophy.
That makes sense. Alderman Coatar, you don't live downtown, but you have represented it now for a number of years. It's part of that 7th Ward. What's the overall gist of what you're hearing from residents about the state of things these days?
Yeah, so, I hear it from a number of residents and also from business owners. The 7th Ward includes the entire central business district of downtown, so basically everything east of Tucker. And what I'm hearing from folks is they're very scared. They're worried about their safety, whether they live there and are there at night and see some of the issues that the alderman from the 5th, my colleague James, has talked about and witnesses regularly, or if they're the office workers who are maybe sporadically back in the office or working from the comfort of their home and seeing some of the news stories about what's going on downtown, there's certainly a level of fear and trepidation about returning to downtown.
Alderman Page, is this a lot of perception? I mean, Alderman Coatar there mentioned people are seeing news reports. These are maybe office workers who used to work downtown, haven't been there as much lately. Is there some reality to these concerns, or are these the suburban folk who don't know?
It is a mixture, and I don't want to put mathematics on it, but it is a mixture of both perception and reality. And quite often, as happens throughout the universe, perception quite often becomes reality. And some of the issues related to crime, which I'm sure we're going to talk about as we go forward with the mayor's plan and the like. Some of the things that we are facing generates perceptions that expand beyond just the city of St. Louis County. It expands into the whole region and gives us somewhat of a negative or opinion or a black eye, so to speak. Some deserved, some not.
So this is something where that perception kind of then feeds on it. Fewer respectable people want to come down. That leaves more place for the troublemakers.
It does. And I hope during this conversation we get a chance to talk about some of the good things in downtown St. Louis. But as is a natural, I think, human sort of, it's kind of a human thing, so to speak, to go to the negative first. Mm-hmm. And especially when it comes to safety and quality of life issues, people tend to go to the negative first, out of fear, out of concern. So that's kind of natural. But it's on all of us within the St. Louis city, our non-government organizations, our 501c3s, our administrative branch in government, our legislative branch, the Board of Aldermen. It's up to all of us to make improvements that will be seen and heard far and wide.
So we heard from downtown resident, this is Danny, they write about polling a group of neighbors and says, quote, overwhelmingly their number one question was about crime. Why was it allowed to get so bad? And what is actually being done now to effectively reduce it in both the short and long term? And these are some Wash Ave loft dwellers. These are not people who are Chesterfield types that never come to downtown. Alderman Coatar, this question of why was it allowed to get so bad? Is there a sense from some people you talked to that this plan from the mayor's office needed to be here months ago? Yeah,
I mean, I certainly understand the frustration, and some of it's a resource issue, and some of it's a priorities issue. I mean, when you talk about, for example, sort of the lack of law enforcement presence downtown, some of that is simply resources. We have a lot. We have many hundreds of vacancies, probably close to 150 vacancies in the police department. The 4th District, which covers downtown, is one of the shortest staffed of our police districts. So we have a resource issue in terms of the number of officers available, to which I have said repeatedly and continue to that we need to prioritize downtown in particular, simply because of the tax base it generates, the out-of-town guests, and frankly the news coverage it gets. And I think we're seeing some of that shift, but with that shift comes the reality of we're pulling resources from elsewhere, and at the end of the day, while downtown has its challenges, and the crime that occurs downtown is often front page news or top of the hour news if you're in radio or TV, it still frankly pales into comparison to some of the crime and the level of violence we see in many of our neighborhoods. So when you're making decisions and having to pull resources from neighborhoods that are very challenged and have very serious crime issues themselves to protect downtown, obviously that comes with a cost, and there's sometimes a political consequence to that. But at the end of the day, downtown is 20+% of our city's general fund. The tax dollars are generated in the downtown central business district, and we have to keep it safe and we have to grow it if we want to tackle the bigger issues citywide. You mentioned where these resources are coming from. The Post-Dispatch reported on the mayor's plan, and they said that the mayor's office told them that the extra 30 officers, quote, will mostly be reassigned from citywide
identified units such as problem properties and the mobile reserve that focuses on pockets of crime throughout the city. Others could be working overtime. Alderman Coatar, I thought that was a little ironic in light of the big fight over overtime and the mayor's office supposedly not wanting more overtime. Now she's talking about overtime.
Right. Well, I'm very glad that Alderman Page supported and that we put the additional $5 million into that police overtime budget in our most recent allocation of American Rescue Plan dollars. But joking aside, certainly I've had my disagreements with the current administration. The issues we're dealing with didn't start on their watch. Now, some of them have gotten worse, and as we've moved into this sort of second year of the pandemic, they've become exacerbated. But I'm glad to see that they're taking them seriously and trying to at least deal with them. I think 30 officers, per shift, I guess, or at night on the weekends is a start. Some of those resources we were already getting downtown, whether it was public or not, those specialized units, that was already sort of part of their mission. So I think, frankly, it's going to probably take more than that to get a handle on some of this, but this is a start, and I'm glad we're at least all talking about it openly and working together.
Alderman Page, what's your sense of things when it comes to this police presence? Do you think 30 officers on the weekends is the right number and the right time that we need them there?
Well, actually, it's hard to actually pin down what that right number is, because we'll see over time what the effectiveness of this force is. I also may want to add right now that we also do have resources from the Sheriff Department. We have Sheriff Vernon Betts has lent some of his resources, especially vehicles with lights flashing and the like, to put in a presence downtown. So you add that to the existing resources, the additional 30, and I'll tell you, that's one of the things that I'm most excited about the mayor's plan, because I think what we're going to have to do as a city, we're going to have to walk and chew gum. We're going to have to deal with issues on the ground when it comes to crime and negative behaviors. At the same time, we've got to deal with root causes, and I'm 100% with the mayor on that. But the thing about it is, root causes as in finding things for our young people to do, alternative activities to roaming and throwing firecrackers and shooting guns, that's going to be tough, but I think it's worth pursuing. But so we got to walk and chew gum. We got to do both of these. We got to get things back into a sense of safety, security, and quality of life while we move forward to longer term planning.
We're interested in hearing your perspective on this discussion we're having with the two aldermen who represent parts of downtown. If you have a question or comment about the state of downtown, our phone lines are now open. You can call us at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. You can also send us a tweet at STL on air and join our conversation that way. We did get a tweet from Umar. He writes, in a sense, downtown has rebounded from where it was in the 1980s and 1990s. I remember it as very desolate and having very few residents. Alderman Coatar, there has been a ton of investment in downtown, and the number of people living there has actually gone up. Do we need to keep that in perspective?
We certainly do. I mean, we've seen billions of dollars of investment in downtown, and I was not here in the 80s or 90s, but I hear the stories from some of our downtown pioneers who are still living in lofts that moved in right when they were rehabbed. And yes, downtown has changed dramatically in the last 20 plus years, and for the better. Now we're dealing with some growing pains, and again, I think a lot of this is exacerbated by the pandemic and not having a workforce and sort of eyes on the street and your daily office workers. But yes, we do have to keep it in perspective that 20 plus years ago, most of the buildings along Washington Avenue were vacant or and boarded up, and now most of them are full of residents, whether they're loft dwellers, condo owners, or renters. And we're happy to have them, and we want to keep them and continue to grow our downtown residential base and our business community.
We also heard on Twitter from at TWarSism, who writes, this issue with gun violence isn't just relegated to downtown. Those of us that live in other parts are also dealing with similar situations. I also think there needs to be more accountability from property owners so that homes don't look like they're abandoned, etc. Some of those same questions that we always have to talk about when we talk about St. Louis. Well, we do want to remind you those phone lines are open, 314-382-8255, and we're talking today to 7th Ward Alderman Jack Coatar and 5th 5th Ward Alderman James Page. We need to take a quick break. And just before we do that, you may have heard comedian Mark Maron was here last week. He joined St. Louis on the Air last Wednesday. He had shows at the Helium Comedy Club all weekend. And he actually started off his podcast this morning with some praise for the city. I feel like we need to hear this today. We need to hear this right in the middle of this discussion that's maybe a bit harder. So Mark Maron talked about how Tamara Keefe, who's the owner of Clementine's Creamery, took him on a tour of the city.
There seemed to be some sort of concerted effort on behalf of the city to make me assess it properly. This town, this city is okay, man. It's okay. We got cool food, we got ice cream, and we got like free museums, man, and good record stores, and decent people, and kind of wild old, brick architecture. Get on board. But I forget that I like these places. I like these Midwestern cities. Until I get someplace, I don't know what's up. And my opinion has not changed of Missouri, in large part, but I do think St. Louis is okay with me.
St. Louis is okay with him. That is St. Louis fan Mark Maron on his WTF with Mark Maron podcast. If you want to catch our entire conversation with Mark last week, where he did talk more about St. Louis, you can search for St. Louis on the Air wherever you get your podcasts, or you can find individual conversations via stlonair.show. And we'll be back shortly after this break to continue our conversation about downtown St. Louis with the two aldermen who've joined us today. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.
And now back to our conversation. We're talking about the state of downtown. My guests today are 5th Ward Alderman James Page, who himself has been a downtown resident for 19 years, and 7th Ward Alderman Jack Coatar, who also represents part of the ward. I'm going to go to the phone lines. We do have a number of callers with some thoughts on all this. Let's go to Rick, who's calling from downtown himself. I guess he's a resident. Rick, hi. You're on St. Louis on the Air.
Hello, hi, Sarah. I'm a longtime fan of your show.
Thank you.
I just wanted to call in as a resident, give my perspective of like how I have seen the downtown area, over the last 11 years that I have lived here. And I think when I first moved here, people exaggerated a lot of the problems with crime, problems with issues with safety. But over the last 5 years or so, I have seen a lot of problems, and they were only exacerbated by the pandemic. Certainly issues with safety. And, another problem I'd say is that with regard to, the development of the area, I think it has slowed down a bit with regard to like businesses moving in and, the momentum that we had about 10 years ago.
Rick, I'm sorry to hear that's been your perspective. Before I let one of the aldermen sort of respond to those thoughts there, you mentioned you feel like things have slowed down. Is there anything else you'd point to that makes you feel like it's been getting worse? This is obviously pre-pandemic for you, that you thought it was getting worse.
Well, I mean, I guess that, I started to see some of these safety issues even before, the pandemic started. We started to see some more issues with regard to people coming downtown and, start doing some of the stuff that, we now know they do, more regularly. But I would say that the momentum that, that we had, when people were sort of moving into the city, has slowed down simply because I just see less people around who are interested in doing that when, by comparison to when I first moved here.
Okay. Well, Rick, thank you for sharing those thoughts, and I'm sorry about those last 5 years. Alderman Page, I saw you kind of react when he said he feels like the momentum is slowing on development.
Well, I certainly can understand and appreciate his view of things. But I'm going to speak for just a second about my view of the fabulous 5th Ward. And yes, I said it, the fabulous 5th Ward, which is part of downtown. I'm just going to mention a few developments not the least of which is Square, which has moved its headquarters into the Fifth Ward.
That's huge.
Another is the Ponce School of Medical Sciences, which, if you saw in the news recently, just announced the opening of its medical school. It is also in the Fifth Ward and will be expanding further in the Fifth Ward into the old Pruitt-Igoe site along Jefferson and Cass. We have market rate developers working, anxious to put shovels in the ground in the Fifth Ward to develop what I call solar villages, homes that are predominantly powered by solar energy. The entire rooftops covered with solar panels, as well as the carports and garages, to definitely offset energy costs. Let's go to the other side of housing and go to affordable housing. We're working closely with large-scale developers. I'm sure you know who they are, who are developing completely rebuilding the old O'Fallon Place into Preservation Square.
Yeah.
We're working with our affordable housing complexes using choice neighborhood grants to improve those neighborhoods. So there is a lot going on in the Fifth Ward. Also with small developers who are developing some of our historical buildings into residential spaces as well as community spaces. So from what I see in the Fifth Ward, including downtown, I'm not seeing things slowing down. Look at the last hotel. I'll stop there.
The Last Hotel is an amazing site. Alderman Coatar, when you and I spoke the other day, you also mentioned there's stuff even going on Laclede's Landing, which I got to admit was a bit of news to me.
There is. We're very proud of the progress we're making on Laclede's Landing. We've got one building, the old Bi-State building, right in the corner of First and Morgan there. First and Lucas, which is now full of residents, 50-plus residential units. We've got 3 buildings under construction. We've spent millions of dollars and some federal disaster relief funds redoing the streets down there. So if you haven't been to Laclede's Landing in a while, I would encourage you to check it out. It's looking lovely. So along those lines, Rick mentioned that things are slowing down. From a dollars and cents terms of development, things are not really slowing down. We've had some new developments between Ballpark Village, the soccer stadium, the work we're doing on Laclede's Landing. But I certainly understand his perspective because, frankly, the buildings in sort of the core of downtown have mostly been redeveloped. Now, we've got a couple of large buildings, namely the Railway Exchange and now the vacant AT&T Tower that need to be, repurposed. But most of the other buildings, we have had, successful developments. So you might not see as much sort of construction in the core of downtown because most of it's been developed, but there's still certainly work to do, and I do understand his frustration with the sort of feeling like things have slowed down. The other thing I would add is in the last decade or so, our neighbor to the west, Clayton, has aggressively pursued businesses that
Law
maybe
firms.
were located down on professional service firms in particular. So we have to remember that we're in a very unique position in this city, unlike our peer cities, where we're competing against our suburban neighbor who's just 10 minutes away, which makes for a very challenging circumstance.
Challenging is right. I want to go back to
I'd be remiss if I didn't add 3 more developments in the Fifth Ward. We have all passed down Olive and seen the Butler Brothers building that consumes an entire city block at around Olive and 17th Street. Well, working with a developer out of Memphis, Tennessee, city administration and I just recently reached a deal to rehab that building into 384 apartments.
Wow.
So when you say slowing down, and I'm working with developers in these deals, another one I'll add, everyone will remember the Shell building that has the Shell sign on the front of it. That has been under development for quite some time. And just this past Friday, a week ago, I met with the developer of the Jefferson Arms Hotel. And that is moving forward. That sits on Tucker. So there's a lot going on in downtown and the Fifth Ward.
This is the dose of optimism that I needed today, Alderman Page. I'm beginning to be like, why didn't I know about this? Why didn't I know about that? This is great to hear. Let's go to the phone lines. We do have a lot of people wanting to join us. We'll see how many we can squeeze in. Ted is calling from University City. Ted, hi, you're on St. Louis on the Air.
Hello, thank you for taking my call. think it was a slap in the face to SCORE, who just revitalized the Post-Dispatch building, that it took us a long time to move the homeless from Intico Plaza. Also, look at the time it took for us to close down Rain nightclub, and it's not purposely 100% closed now, but all the trouble that was on Washington Avenue, and much of it from Rain.
Ted, thank you for that, for those thoughts there. Alderman Coatar, I want to go to you on this Rain question. The city did suspend their liquor license. There was a lot of concerns from residents about this place. There's also a lot of the business owner herself saying this was racism on the part of the city to shut that down. Why did it take so long for the city to take action here?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is something I've been harping on with the city administration for a number of months. And you'll may remember last year in December, we had a very high-profile incident at Rain. A number of people shot. In fact, that was the basis for the shutdown order that was issued by the excise commissioner. And at that time, the city utilized its emergency COVID powers to shut the bar down for a number of weeks. And then they reopened, and then they were shut down again. But at the end of the day, we never really dealt with the core issue, which was not just the COVID violations, but the violence that some of the patrons and frankly some of the staff at Rain are causing on Washington Avenue and around. So the excise commissioner, at the I think strong urging of the new administration, finally did call for a detriment hearing and take some action. And so we had a full-blown hearing, I guess, 2 weeks ago, and that hearing will be concluded on the 27th. So in the interim, Rain's license is suspended. Obviously, they will have certain appeal rights, and we'll deal with that if and when we cross, when we need to. But yes, this bar in particular was a source of many of our problems, particularly on Washington Avenue. And for those who say otherwise, I would say, well, look at the last 2 weekends when they've been closed. We've had next to no issues in and around that area of Washington Avenue.
Alderman Page, do you share that perspective?
I do indeed. I do indeed. And so there are really three parts to this public hearing. There are two parts to the liquor license hearing. It will be continued with hearing additional evidence. I believe it's on the 27th. And today, as we speak, there is a nuisance hearing taking place. So the city has taken the Rain issue seriously. That is following up on a number of shootings. I keep my own count, but I don't want to say it publicly because there's always some possible error or misperception, but I'm very happy that the city is moving forward. I think it's one of the great steps in the direction of safety and quality of life. May I address Intico Plaza for a second?
I would welcome that. Yes.
Yes. Well, I'll try to be as brief as possible. The caller is quite right that it took longer than I personally think it should have to shut down the encampment on Intico Plaza. But I have to say, first and foremost, homelessness, especially in the St. Louis region, is a very complex issue. And as a legislator with the city, I always take into account the benefits for the homeless in everything that I do. However, we have some issues that I might want to point out. There is a great aggregation, if you will, of homeless services in the downtown area and in the Fifth Ward. And I, for one, think that we all own, as a region, we own the homeless issue. So I will be campaigning in that direction. It took longer. I worked with business leaders in the downtown area to set up an alternative to, you probably have heard the term Camp Cole, to set up an alternative. We were supposed to have done a flash cut to Camp Cole. That didn't happen as fast. We had to hear from some activists who opposed the program, but and unfortunately violence escalated. But I can say that on the Friday prior to Labor Day, we were successful in getting that closed, and Camp Cole is fully housed.
Okay, so that's great to hear that those people have been moved into housing. But it sounds like you're saying these homeless issues can't be just downtown issues. This needs to be something we think about more globally.
Absolutely. If I had an hour, I'd go into more detail.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate that you haven't taken that hour, so thank you so much for that. And we touched on so many things today, and I feel so bad that we're short on time here. But unfortunately, this is the way radio goes. So, Fifth Ward Alderman James Page, I want to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And Seventh Ward Alderman Jack Coatar, we have just a final thought, if you're willing to share it.
Certainly, yeah, Sarah. And my final thought would be this. I think, as we get through this pandemic and we can show that the city is being a partner in coming up with solutions for our issues downtown, when the workforce comes back, I think we're going to be in a great place.
Well, I like to hear that optimism, so I'm glad we ended on that note. I want to thank both of these gentlemen for joining us. If you want to keep that conversation going, just search for St. Louis on the Air on Facebook and join us there. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here. If you learned something new from today's episode, consider leaving us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the easiest way to help people discover our show. We appreciate it. Thank you.
This episode was produced by Sarah Fensky and Laura Hamden, with audio engineering and sound design by Aaron Dorr and Jane Mather-Glass.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri, St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.